You're too old to manage money. The words hit me like a bucket of ice water. I stood there in my own kitchen, my hand frozen on the refrigerator door, listening to my daughter-in-law explain how my mind was slipping. She had papers spread across the table, bank statements, medical forms, documents I'd never seen before. My son stood behind her, silent, staring at the floor. A coldness I didn't recognize washed over me, replacing the initial shock, because what she didn't know, what they couldn't possibly imagine, was that I had already changed the last name on the deed. The house was never going to be theirs. If you're watching this video, please like and subscribe to my channel. The setup, vulnerability and inciting incident. For 2 years I had perfected the performance. After my husband passed, they saw what they wanted to see, a grieving widow, confused by finances, overwhelmed by the responsibility of a house. I let them believe it. I'd call my son about a bill I understood perfectly, feigning confusion over the due date. I'd ask my daughter-in-law to double-check my checkbook register, pretending I'd transposed numbers. Every request was a carefully placed brick in the wall of their perception. They started monitoring my small accounts. The ones I kept visible, they'd comment if I bought a new sweater, suggesting maybe I should be more careful. I'd just nod, playing the part of the sweet, slightly lost old woman. It was a suffocating dance, but every time I saw that flicker of pity in their eyes, I knew the facade was holding. The inciting document arrived on a Tuesday. She came over with a folder, her smile too bright. "We found a way to make things easier for you, Mom," she said. The word Mom feeling like a lie on her tongue, she slid the power of attorney papers across the kitchen table. My son hovered in the doorway, unable to meet my eyes. I remember the laminate felt cool under my fingertips as I traced the bold letters. "It's for your own good," she explained. Her voice rehearsed. "This just protects you. If anything were to happen, we could step in and handle everything. No stress for you." I looked from her eager face to my son's guilty posture. The recognition was a physical pain, a crushing weight in my chest. This wasn't protection. This was theft, dressed up in legal language and concern. They weren't trying to help me. They were trying to erase me. And in that moment, the first flicker of the plan I had already set in motion months earlier ignited into a cold, steady flame. I didn't say a word. I just looked at the papers, then at them, and let them see the tears well up. They saw vulnerability. I felt the quiet click of a trap about to spring. To understand why this betrayal cut so deep, you have to understand what this house represents. It wasn't just property. It was 30 years of sacrifice. My husband and I bought this place when it was a fixer-upper with a leaking roof. We worked double shifts, he at the plant, me cleaning offices at night. Our vacations were spent patching drywall and painting ceilings. I remember eating beans and rice for a month to make a mortgage payment, telling our son we were on a special adventure diet. Every nail, every brushstroke was a piece of our life invested in this soil. We poured everything into our son, too. His college tuition came from a second mortgage. His wedding, a beautiful affair he deserved, meant we deferred repairs on the house for another 5 years. We never regretted a single sacrifice. That's what you do for family. You build a life for the next generation. To see that same son now, standing silently, while his wife laid out a plan to take it all away. The bitterness was a taste I couldn't swallow. My suspicion started months before that Tuesday. I was in the garden when I overheard her on the phone, her voice sharp. "The equity in that house is our retirement plan," she'd said. "We just need to get her to sign it over. The words hung in the air, chilling despite the sun. I stayed perfectly still behind the rose bushes, my heart pounding. That afternoon I called Arthur Milstein, the lawyer who'd handled my husband's will. I met him in his dusty office, the scent of old books a strange comfort. I laid it out quietly, the overheard conversation, the sudden interest in my finances. Arthur listened, his fingers steepled. He explained my options in a low, measured tone. A quitclaim deed, he said, would transfer my interest, but I could change the beneficiary. I could put the house in a trust. There were ways to protect myself preemptively. The decision crystallized in that moment. I would not fight them openly. I would not cause a scene. I would act silently and completely. The deed change was completed 3 weeks before my daughter-in-law ever placed those power of attorney papers on my table. I had the new document tucked away in a safety deposit box they knew nothing about, a secret shield against their coming attack. So when I sat at that table, feigning confusion and fear, I was already armed. Their play for power was based on a fundamental miscalculation. They thought they were dealing with a weak old woman. They had no idea they were challenging the woman who had built the very foundation they wanted to steal. The performance of surrender was just the next step in a war they didn't yet know we were fighting. 30 years of sacrifice. I want you to understand what they were really trying to take. This house isn't just wood and nails to me. It's the ghost of my husband's laughter in the hallway. It's the faint pencil marks on the kitchen doorframe charting our son's growth. It's every dream we ever had, made solid. We bought this place when it was little more than a shell. The real estate agent called it a handyman's special, which was a polite way of saying the roof leaked and the floors slanted. But we saw past the decay. We saw a home. For the first 5 years, we didn't own a single piece of new furniture. Every spare cent went into the mortgage. My husband Frank would come home from the plant, covered in grease, eat a quick dinner, and then spend the evening rewiring the electricity. I'd be beside him holding the flashlight, my hands raw from stripping wallpaper until midnight. Our hands built these walls, our sweat sealed this roof. We'd fall into bed exhausted, listening to the rain, praying the tarps would hold until the weekend when we could afford more shingles. We told our son we were camping. We'd make a game of it, eating sandwiches on a blanket in the living room because we had no table. He was too young to understand the financial strain, to see the worry in our eyes when another bill arrived. We shielded him from all of it. That's what you do. You absorb the pressure so your children can have a childhood. We went without so he could have everything. I remember saving my lunch money for a month to buy him a new pair of sneakers for school, telling him I'd just found a great sale. When he got into college, we were so proud. The tuition bills were staggering. Frank took on more overtime. I started cleaning offices on weekends. We took out a second mortgage on this very house, betting our future on his. We sat at this same kitchen table, the one where my daughter-in-law would later lay her trap, and signed the papers. We looked at each other and knew it was the right thing to do. This house was an investment in our family's legacy, or so we thought. His wedding was another mountain. His wife Jessica came from a family that expected a certain standard. We wanted to give him that beautiful day, so we did. We paid for the hall, the band, the catering. We smiled through the entire reception, so happy for him. And when it was over, we went back to a house that needed a new furnace we couldn't afford. We never said a word to him. We didn't want to cast a shadow on his happiness. That's the unspoken contract of parenthood. You give until there's nothing left, and you call it love. So when I heard Jessica talk about the equity in this house as their retirement plan, the bitterness was a physical thing, a knot in my throat. This wasn't equity to me. It was years of missed vacations. It was the sound of Frank's hammer on a Saturday morning. It was the scent of paint that lingered in our hair for days. It was the weight of every sacrifice we ever made. They saw an asset. I saw my life. They wanted to liquidate my memories, turn my struggle into their comfort. The sheer entitlement of it took my breath away. They had enjoyed the benefits of our sacrifices their entire lives, and now they felt entitled to the source itself. They didn't want to care for me. They wanted to cash me in. Tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story of revenge from. The secret plan, deed change and performance. The plan began not with anger, but with a quiet, chilling clarity. After overhearing Jessica's phone call about the equity, I couldn't unhear it. The words played on a loop in my mind, colouring every interaction. Her sudden interest in my grocery spending wasn't concern. It was reconnaissance. Her offers to help organise my files weren't kindness. They were inventory. I had to move, but I had to move like a ghost, completely undetected. My first move was to Arthur Milstein. His office was a time capsule, smelling of leather and old paper. I didn't go into dramatic detail. I simply said, "My daughter-in-law is planning to take my house. What can I do to stop her without them knowing I've done anything?" Arthur, a man who had seen every kind of family dispute, didn't flinch. He laid out the mechanics of a deed change with the calm precision of a surgeon. He explained that I could execute a new deed, transferring the property out of my sole name. The key, he stressed, was the beneficiary. I couldn't just put it in my name again. That would be pointless. I needed to place it somewhere safe, somewhere they would never think to look. We discussed a trust, but that felt too formal, too easily discovered if they ever dug deep enough. Then he suggested something simpler, yet more profound. I could use a life estate deed. This type of deed would give me the right to live in the house for the rest of my life. But upon my death, the property would automatically pass to a beneficiary of my choosing, completely bypassing any will or probate. It was elegant and brutal. It would render any power of attorney they obtained useless for the one asset they truly wanted. The house would be mine until my last breath, and then it would go to whomever I named. They would get nothing. The question was, who would I name? My son was out of the question. My only sibling lived across the country and wanted no part of property management. I thought about it for days, walking through the quiet rooms of the house. And then I thought of Clara, my oldest friend, the woman who had been by my side since our children were in diapers. Clara was sharp, honest, and she had no financial need that would tempt her. More importantly, I trusted her implicitly. I called her and explained the situation in a hushed voice. She listened, and without a moment's hesitation she said, "Of course, May, whatever you need." There was no greed in her voice, only loyalty. That was the final piece. A week later, I told my son I had a doctor's appointment. It wasn't a complete lie. I did have a checkup scheduled for the afternoon, but that morning I drove to Arthur's office. The signing of the new deed was a quiet, solemn affair. There was no fanfare, just the scratch of a pen, the heavy thud of a notary's stamp. I signed my name, transferring the future interest of my home to Clara. The document felt weightless in my hands, but its implications were immense. I was now a fortress, and they didn't even know the walls had been raised. I placed the original deed in a new safety deposit box at a bank across town, one in my name only. I gave a copy to Arthur for his files and hid another in a book on my shelf, a thick, boring history volume I knew Jessica would never open. The trap was set, and I was the bait. Returning home, the performance began in earnest. Now that I had secured my foundation, every act of vulnerability became a strategic choice. I had to reinforce their belief in my incompetence, to lure them into a false sense of security. It was a delicate, exhausting dance. I'd wait for them to visit, and then deliberately fumble with my checkbook. "Jessica, dear," I'd say, my voice trembling slightly, "these numbers just swim on the page sometimes. Could you help me make sure this is right?" I'd watch her take the checkbook, a flicker of satisfaction in her eyes. She thought she was seeing confirmation of my decline. I was watching her take the hook. I started forgetting to pay minor bills. I'd let the water bill go a week past due, then call my son in a panic. "I'm so sorry, I just found it under a pile of mail." I'm losing my mind. I could hear the concern in his voice, but I could also hear the validation. They were building their case, and I was handing them the evidence. I'd ask Jessica to explain my homeowner's insurance policy to me for the third time, pretending I couldn't grasp the difference between liability and property coverage. She would sigh, a barely perceptible sound, and patiently explain it again. Each sigh was a victory for me. They were so sure they were winning. The internal satisfaction was a strange, cold comfort. Watching them underestimate me was like watching a play where I was the only one who knew the ending. There was a growing tension between the facade I presented and the sharp, calculating reality beneath. I had to be careful not to slip. One moment of clarity, one display of the steel I knew I possessed, and the entire plan could collapse. So I leaned into the role. I became the woman they thought I was. Forgetful, anxious, dependent. It was the greatest acting performance of my life, and the stakes were everything I had. The research phase began almost as a parallel operation. Now that I knew their goal, I needed to understand their motive. Why now? What was the urgency? I started paying closer attention to the fragments of conversation I overheard. Jessica's new car, a sleek import that seemed far beyond their means, the talk of a vacation to a resort I'd only seen in magazines. The pieces didn't fit with the budget I knew my son, an accountant, would insist on. I enlisted Clara for this part. She was better with computers than I was. While I maintained the performance at home, she did some discreet digging. It didn't take long to uncover the truth. Jessica had a secret life, funded by secret debts. There were maxed-out credit cards in her name only, accounts my son seemed unaware of, store cards for high-end boutiques, statements from luxury hotels. The pattern was clear. She was living a lifestyle she couldn't afford, and the pressure was mounting. My house, my life's work, was to be her bailout. This wasn't a spontaneous idea. It was a desperate plan. The realization was a second betrayal. This was always the plan. I was not a mother-in-law to be cared for. I was a line item on a balance sheet, an asset to be liquidated to cover her extravagance. We gathered the evidence methodically. Clara printed out what she could find from public records. Liens were a matter of public record, she explained. She compiled a file, a quiet dossier of their financial reality. My son's name was conspicuously absent from the worst of it. It seemed he was in the dark, or perhaps willfully ignoring the signs. The picture that emerged was one of a woman cornered by her own choices, seeing my home as the only escape. It made her dangerous. A desperate person will take desperate actions, and that meant my performance had to be flawless. I had to convince her that I was the easiest solution to her problems. I had to make her believe the victory was already hers. The confrontation was inevitable. I just had to make sure it happened on my terms when I was ready. The calm before the storm was a period of intense silent activity. I was preparing for a war they didn't know was coming, and I intended to win it without firing a single shot they could see. Escalation and intelligence. The calm I had manufactured was a thin veneer over a churning sea of calculation. Jessica's frustration was becoming a tangible force in the house. My performance of confusion, which had once seemed to satisfy her, now only seemed to irritate her. The power of attorney papers sat on the edge of the kitchen counter for a week, a silent accusation. She'd pick them up, tap them against her palm, and look at me with a mixture of pity and impatience. "We really need to get this sorted, May," she'd say, her voice losing its practiced sweetness. "It's for your own protection." The rehearsed speech was starting to fray. The mask of concern was slipping to reveal the raw ambition beneath. I'd just nod, my eyes wide, and murmur something about it being so much paperwork that it made my head spin. "I'll look at it tomorrow, dear," I'd promise, knowing full well I would not. Each delay was a small act of defiance, a tiny stone in the path of her plan. I was forcing her to reveal her hand, to show more of the aggression she was trying to conceal. The escalation came on a Saturday morning. My son David was there, which was unusual for a weekend visit. He usually came alone. His presence signaled something formal, something planned. Jessica didn't bother with the folder this time. She stood in the middle of my living room, her arms crossed. "May, this resistance isn't helpful," she said, her tone flat and cold. "If you're not capable of understanding the importance of this, then we may have to consider other options." David shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "Jess, maybe—" he started, but she cut him off with a sharp look. "No, David, this is about her safety. If she can't manage her own affairs, then the courts have a process for that. Guardianship proceedings. It's a way to ensure she's taken care of." The word guardianship hung in the air like a threat. It was no longer a suggestion of help. It was a threat of removal. They weren't just asking for control. They were suggesting I be declared incompetent. The coldness I felt was absolute. I let my lower lip tremble. You want to put me in a home," I whispered, laying it on thick. "No one said anything about a home," David interjected quickly, his face pale. "It's just legal oversight." "It's for your own good," Jessica repeated, the phrase now sounding like a curse. "In fact, we've spoken to a financial advisor, a professional. He's reviewed your situation and agrees that some protective measures are necessary. He's willing to meet with us next week to go over everything." Clara's face would harden. "They have no idea who they're dealing with, May. They see a little old lady. They don't see the woman who held her family together through 30 years of hard work. She was my cheerleader, but she was also practical. She helped me think through scenarios. What if they showed up with the advisor? What if they tried to force me into the car?" We rehearsed my responses. I would be polite but firm. I would refuse to go. I would say I wasn't feeling well. I had a script for every contingency. Then there was Benjamin, my financial advisor, the real one, the one I had chosen decades ago, not the phantom Jessica had conjured. Benjamin was a discreet man in his 60s who had managed our modest investments since Frank passed. I had confided in him early on after my first meeting with Arthur. He was horrified but not entirely surprised. "I've seen this before, May," he'd said sadly. "It's a pattern. The adult children, or in this case the in-law, see the parents' assets as their inheritance, not as the parents' security. Benjamin was running parallel numbers. He helped me understand the true value of the house, not just the market price, but the emotional and practical value. He also helped me secure my other assets. We moved small amounts of money into new accounts, ensuring that even if they somehow got the power of attorney, the liquid assets they knew about would be minimal. He was fortifying the financial walls around me. Between Arthur's legal fortress and Benjamin's financial moat, I was becoming increasingly untouchable. This secret network was my safety net, the one they didn't see. They thought I was isolated, a lonely widow with no one to turn to. They had no idea I was surrounded by a loyal army. Their perception of my vulnerability was their greatest weakness. It made them arrogant. It made them rush. And in their rush, they were making mistakes. The tension was a living thing in the house now. It was in the air I breathed. Every ring of the phone was a potential skirmish. Every car that slowed in front of the house sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I was living on a knife's edge, performing a high-wire act between utter helplessness and cold, calculated strategy. The facade was becoming harder to maintain. The urge to stand up, to look Jessica in the eye and tell her exactly what I thought of her, was a physical pressure in my chest, but I swallowed it down. The time for truth was coming, but it had to be on my terms, at the moment of my choosing. Right now, I had to let them believe the trap was empty. I had to let them walk right into it. The final stage of the intelligence gathering was understanding their timeline. Why Tuesday? What was the significance? Clara, with her knack for digging, found a possible answer. She discovered that Jessica had a credit card payment due at the end of the month, a substantial one from a high-interest account. The payment was large enough that missing it would trigger serious penalties. The Tuesday meeting with the advisor was likely a fiction, a pretext to get the power of attorney signed, so Jessica could immediately access my accounts to cover her debt. The urgency wasn't about my well-being, it was about her financial desperation. This knowledge was the final piece of the puzzle. It confirmed that this was not a misguided attempt at care. It was a financially motivated assault. I wasn't just protecting my home, I was preventing a crime. Elder financial abuse, Arthur had called it. Now I had the evidence of the motive. The trap was set, and the bait was their own greed. All I had to do was wait for them to take it. The calm before the revelation was the most intense period of all. The house was quiet, but my mind was racing. I went over every detail, every possible outcome. I rehearsed the words I would say. I visualized the moment of revelation, the look on their faces when they realized the power had never been theirs to take. It was a quiet, fierce joy, tempered by the sadness of what this would do to my relationship with my son. But that was a cost I had to accept. He had made his choice by his silence. He had chosen his wife over his mother. Now I was making my choice. I was choosing myself. The final trap. The Monday before their supposed meeting with the financial advisor dawned grey and quiet. I had slept little, my mind rehearsing the final moves. This was the day I would spring the trap I had spent months building. Jessica called mid-morning, her voice brittle with forced cheer. "Just confirming we'll pick you up at 9:30 sharp tomorrow, May. The advisor is very busy, so we can't be late." I made my voice sound thin and weary. "Oh, all right, dear, if we must." I could almost feel her satisfaction through the phone line. She thought I had capitulated. She thought the battle was over.